All right, switching over to presentation mode. I am presenting the screen. And there's our screen. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, hang on. All right, I heard a beep. Sorry, I just want to make sure that everybody who wants to join has joined. But okay, I'm just seeing that you can see. The way this is set up, I can't see chat at the same time as I'm seeing the presentations, but it is what it is. Okay, right. So we've been talking about nematodes. The order Rhabditida includes C. elegans. That's one of the big free living ones. I believe it also includes Pelioditis, which I'm going to try to show you guys, not in this week's virtual lab, but next week's. But it includes Tylenchina, Rhabditina, and Spirurina. We talked about Tylenchina the last time. Rhabditina includes an order that's an important group of parasites, which includes human hookworm and also a lot of vet parasites. Although, as far as I know, more livestock than dog and cat. So vet people, I don't know how many of these you're going to see if you do small animal practice. The big one for humans is human hookworm, which is the first one I'm going to talk about. Males can be recognized by having a really big copulatory bursa. Now, you saw a picture of this earlier. The copulatory bursa is kind of a pouch with a couple of flaps that the males use to attach to females at copulation. And then there's often one or more little spikes inside the bursa called copulatory spicules that hold the female's vulva open to transfer the sperm. Because remember, the sperm can't swim. But that copulatory bursa tends to be unusually broad. Sometimes it's supported by what look like rays, so it almost looks like a fish fin in strongyloids. And here's the most notorious of them all. That's hookworm. That is genus Necator. There's a closely related genus called Ancylostoma. These are human parasites, and although they're mostly under control now, they used to be a big problem, especially in the southern United States. This is hookworm. The head, as you can tell, is hooked, hence the name. That mouth is always open. It opens into a buccal capsule, just an open mouth, which is connected to a powerful pumping esophagus. These are blood feeders. They live in the gut, but I don't think they feed that much on digested food. They are primarily feeders on blood. Ding. The hooked head has that mouth. The mouth has sharp plates for gripping and cutting. On the left, you've got genus Necator. You can see it's smooth-edged. It's more toothy in Ancylostoma. The males at the posterior end have a large copulatory bursa. You're looking at it from the side there, but it's a pair of flaps supported by these finger-like rays. And the arrangement and shape of the rays is important for telling species apart. Inside the bursa, there are also spicules that hold open the female's vulva while the amoeboid sperm are passed out and passed into the female's reproductive tract. Eggs get passed out in feces. They develop outside the body in 24 to 48 hours. On the left, there's an early embryo. You can still see individual embryonic cells. On the right, there's an egg that's about to hatch, and you can see there's an actual little coiled up worm inside the egg. They develop faster if there's oxygen present, and poop-eating insects, or if you want the fancy term, coprophagous insects, dung beetles and things like that, can oxygenate the feces and might also spread these some distance. So the eggs can be spread some distance away from where the actual poop was laid out. Ding. Juveniles just feed on the decaying poop. They molt twice. The third stage, it's labeled stage 3 in that diagram from the CDC. It's labeled filariform larva. That stage doesn't feed, but it can survive for, I believe, up to 6 weeks without feeding. And it will simply sit there and wait for the chance to penetrate the skin of a host. These are transmitted when the juveniles contact bare human skin. So you can get them by walking barefoot, by lying down on the ground if you're in a susceptible area. And they can travel up to 6 feet from the original poop. So you don't actually have to step in someone's feces. You just have to step with a bare foot within about 6 feet of the place where an infected person relieved himself 4 to 6 weeks prior. So, yeah, you don't actually have to knowingly walk close to where somebody has dropped a deuce in order to be infected. The juveniles burrow into the skin and they jump into the circulatory system. They travel from there to the lungs. They burrow into the lungs, and by irritating the lungs, they stimulate the cough reflex. So they're coughed up and then swallowed. And when you swallow them, of course, they're brought to the gut, and that's where the worms latch on to intestinal villi, start slurping down blood, sexually mature, and reproduce. And what you're looking at there, ding, is a cross-section through the head of a worm that's latched onto a little bite of intestinal tissue. That big kind of upside-down U thing is the worm's jaws. And just to the right of those, you can see that muscular pumping esophagus, that stripy thing that you're seeing on the right-hand side. That's the worm's esophagus slurping up blood. These worms secrete factors that inhibit neutrophils. Neutrophils are a class of white blood cell. They also secrete anticoagulant peptides. The anticoagulant, by the way, has been patented. It's been tested clinically. I'm not sure what the results are off the bat. I didn't have a chance to check before going live. But, medicine is always interested in new clot-busting drugs. And ironically, it could be hookworm ending up being the source of a new one. So people are looking into that. Ding, I say, ding. Necator americanus, despite the name, is actually native to Africa. Was brought by slaves. And African slaves actually have some degree of natural immunity to this. I mean, they can certainly get sick with them, but not as badly as Europeans who didn't have any natural immunity. And hookworm used to be endemic in the American South. An average of 40% of the population was infected.
Dr. Wagner?
Yes.
My slides, I just got to the slide that the inhibiting neutrophils slide, like it just changed.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that's just me. If it's just me, then ignore it. It's fine. Oh,
okay.
It finally switched over. Okay, it's just being really slow.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll try to give a little bit more transition time between slides.
It's fine. It's probably just my internet.
Okay, all right. Anyway, yeah, so an average of 40% of the American South population was infected. In colder climates, I don't think the worms develop as well. And in some areas, it was over 90%. You can see a rural white sufferer. The main symptom of heavy hookworm infestation is anemia. One of the odder symptoms is geophagy, the uncontrollable desire to eat dirt. Infected people preferred red clay. That's actually a picture of a deposit of clay by the side of a dirt road that's actually been dug out by people who would seek out this particular clay as being particularly, well, good to eat. There are cases of uninfected people that used to eat clay as well. My grandmother is very Southern, but used to live in New York City for a time in the 30s. And apparently she knew Southern expatriates living in New York, I think mostly African American, that used to have their relatives send them clay. It was a custom in the rural South at the time. And iron-rich clay would counteract the loss of iron through intestinal bleeding. The problem is you could also get hookworm from eating the clay if you ingested larvae that were inside the clay itself. So, yeah, one of the odder little sidelights of this. 2, 1.
So did they crave?
Go ahead.
Did they crave the clay to get the iron, or was it like a suggestive thing from the parasite?
As far as I know, it wasn't so much the parasite directly manipulating behavior like we've seen in those, flatworms that do weird things to snails and ants. I think it was just the body recognizing that it had a severe mineral shortage, and eating clay would provide at least temporary relief. I don't think it was the parasites directly screwing with the brain. I think it was the body recognizing, hey, we've got an iron shortage and eating this stuff makes me feel better. As far as I know, I couldn't be wrong on that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Mild infections may not even have any symptoms, and they may only last a few months because the worms only live a couple of months before they're shed. And I'm not going to tell anybody to go out and do this, but I've seen the claim that swallowing a very small number of hookworm larvae deliberately can actually help with autoimmune diseases. This is something we've talked about a couple of times before, and I've seen suggestions that mild hookworm will actually help, although obviously I can't tell anybody to go out and try this. The problem is that if you're living in the rural South, you're probably walking barefoot a lot, probably sitting on the ground a lot. You're probably using the same tree to defecate behind, and you tend to get constantly reinfected over and over again. And the anemia is not helped by just general malnutrition and poverty. So chronic hookworm infection is debilitating. You lose a lot of blood. You get physically weak. You can get that swollen belly that you've seen in that picture and in the previous one. If you're a child and you get it, chronic anemia in childhood can mess with the development of the brain. You can end up mentally deficient as well as physically weakened by this. And the stereotype of the rural Southerner, white or black, as being lazy and slow and dumb and sitting there on the rocking chair, ain't doing nothing, just hanging out with the hound dogs, that sort of thing. To the extent that ever had any truth at all, it's got more to do with hookworm than any kind of, defect of character. This used to infect in some counties up to 90% of the population. This is not an isolated problem. Right. Ding. Mark Twain is famous for writing The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and a lot of other stuff that's well worth reading. And he could be wonderfully warm and funny, but when he had his mind to be satirical, he delivered some of the sickest burns in American literature. especially in his later years when he pretty much took the gloves off. In the last year of his life, he published Letters from the Earth, which was a history of humanity, told, the biblical account. He tells the creation and the flood and all of that, but he's doing it from the devil's point of view and pointing out that God is an absolute jerk because he's created so many ways for humanity to suffer. It's the age-old question of, if God is really good, why does suffering take place? And Mark Twain really lets God have it. So I won't read the whole thing, but he talks about the thorough and comprehensive study which the Creator devoted to the great work of making man miserable. He devised a special affliction agent for each and every detail of man's structure, overlooking not a single one. Many poor people have to go barefoot because they cannot afford shoes. The Creator saw his opportunity. I will remark in passing that he always has his eye on the poor. 9/10 of his disease inventions were intended for the poor, and they get them. The well-to-do get only what is left over. And according to Mark Twain, one of the Creator's nastiest inventions was hookworm. All of the Creator's specially deadly disease producers are invisible. It is an ingenious idea. The disease induced by the hookworm had been doing its evil work here and there ever since Shem landed on Ararat. Shem's one of Noah's sons, if you don't know. But it was never suspected to be a disease at all. The people who had it were merely supposed to be lazy and were therefore despised and made fun of when they should have been pitied. The hookworm is a peculiarly sneaking and underhanded invention and has done its surreptitious work unmolested for ages. But that physician and his helpers will exterminate it now. So there. Yeah. Apparently the hookworm is evidence of a divine creator who is an absolute bastard. What you choose to make of that is entirely up to you. But there was a physician that discovered it 2 or 3 years ago. Ding. And beginning that same year, 1910, the Rockefeller Commission mounted this anti-hookworm campaign, distributing medicines. Here you can see there's a banner up. I believe this is a schoolhouse in North Carolina, where the banner says free hookworm treatment here every Thursday. And they tried to educate the public on the need for better sanitation to fight what they were calling the germ of laziness. If Southerners could just shake hookworm infestation, they'd be industrious and able to work hard and earn lots of money for the capitalist economy and all that stuff. Simply distributing medicines didn't work very well, partly because, if you take the medicine and then you promptly get reinfected, it's done you no good. And partly because, this is something I pointed out earlier, simply riding into town on a white horse and saying, "Here, I have medicine, take this and you will feel better," and then riding away doesn't actually help if you don't get the trust of the community on your side. So you can talk about taking this free medication until you're blue in the face, and if you don't have the trust of the people you're trying to help, they're simply not going to comply. Why should they? Why should they take this nasty tasting thing that some damn Yankee has just waltzed in and handed to you? Ding. They did do some work in trying to get the message out in more positive ways, and this is something that we're going to see elsewhere. They actually created a children's book as an educational aid to show how hookworm was spread. There's the boy right there. You can see his bare feet are really dirty. Just behind him is the outhouse. And I opted not to show the previous illustration from the book. But in the previous illustration, the outhouse was overflowing. So that boy has just walked through an awful lot of poop, and you can see the hookworm larvae burrowing into his toes. with the dog evidently saying, "Oh, you hookworms." I did not know that dogs could talk like this, but this is a way of trying to get the message out in a way that the local population could understand. And we'll see this being used again with a different nematode. Ding. And in some rural counties, infection rates stayed high into the 50s. What has really changed things is partly education, partly just better sanitation. The introduction of sewage treatment breaks that life cycle. Where sewage wasn't treated, teaching people how to dig deeply dug outhouse pits instead of just going behind a tree. They worked out that the larval hookworms could travel up to 6 feet. So, dig your outhouse pit deeper than 6 feet, and, the juveniles simply won't be able to spread. And that broke the life cycle, and the disease is now under control in the rural South. There are some pockets where it might persist. And I read something about it being a problem now in fields that are being worked by migrant labor. Now, in California, migrant workers are required by law to have restroom facilities and time to use them. And that's not so much out of deep-seated concern for the migrant laborers as the fact that this is the kind of thing that prohibits feces-borne parasites being spread. But I'm told in some areas of the South, migrant workers may not get that kind of access, and you get the same kind of problem that you had in the rural South 150 years ago. But the eradication, mostly, of hookworm is actually correlated with a rise in both literacy and economic productivity in the South. So this actually had a noticeable effect on the Southern economy and general prosperity. All right, I'm going to take a momentary break from the slides. Everybody doing okay? Right? Everybody able to see what's going on?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, however, the slides are kind of lagging behind.
Okay, yeah, Willow was saying that too. I'm not sure what I can do about it. I'm trying to give slower transitions between slides so that even if there's a lag, you don't get too far behind. I don't know if I have a way to fix that, but I'm aware of it. Right. Okay, so much for Necator americanus. Ding. There is a similar species that's native to southern Europe, northern Africa, all the way to India and Southeast Asia. This is Ancylostoma duodenale. If you look on the right, the one labeled male, you can see how the body ends in what looks like a couple of fins. That's actually that big copulatory bursa supported by multiple rays that look a little bit like fish fins. And again, this is typical of strongyloid nematodes. Ancylostoma actually consumes more blood per worm, quarter milliliter per worm per day, roughly 10 times what Necator americanus causes. So you need fewer worms to cause severe symptoms there. But that's one that anybody going on to med school might conceivably see. Ding. There's other species that can infect dogs and cats. Nick, if you're listening, I don't know if you've ever seen these or if you're likely to see them. I really don't know how common dog or cat ancylostoma is around here. Nick, you ever heard of these?
I don't think I've heard of them. I definitely haven't seen them.
Okay. All right. And these can't complete their life cycle in humans, but they can penetrate human skin. And juveniles cause a condition called cutaneous larva migrans, which is not unique to ancylostoma. Anytime you've got a parasite larva trying to burrow through a body, whether it is a normal parasite or one that's out of place, the condition's called larva migrans. And here you can see the track of one crawling through the skin. Fortunately, it will end there. Ancylostoma of dogs and cats can't complete its life cycle in humans, but it does cause irritation. There was actually a case of this a couple of years ago because these species can survive in sand. Necator americanus generally can't, but dog ancylostoma can. And if you walk your dog and you don't clean up after it, you can get ancylostoma larvae in beach sand. And as you can see, there was a case 2 years ago of a teenager who was on a mission trip to South Florida and got buried in sand completely. Right, something fun to do to your little sister, and hopefully remember to dig her up again. Not that I ever did that. And this can be the result. Ding. That's the actual guy who got buried. And over there on the right, you can see the results of a rather bad case of cutaneous larva migrans. So, yeah, if you go to the beach, I guess because it happened to anyone, hopefully the people walking their dogs on the beach have cleaned up after them. If not, you could have a rather unwelcome surprise in store. So please clean up after your dog and think twice about getting buried in sand. Just say in there. Wear flip-flops. Okay, ding. There's others that don't usually parasitize humans, but they can be serious problems for livestock. This is one that you sometimes see in sheep and goats. Haemonchus contortus lives in the stomach, and the ovaries of the female actually wrap spirally around that blood-filled gut. And so the common name for these guys is barber pole worm. They look like the red and white spirally striped poles outside of barber shops. So that's one you might see if you do livestock veterinary practice. By the way, most of the pictures from here on out are going to show livestock autopsy pictures. So I'm just warning you, I don't think there's anything that's truly gross, but some of these are going to get a little bit visceral. Haha. That's the cecum of a horse infected with Strongyloid vulgaris. And I believe this is the one that somebody asked a question about last time. Both Strongyloid and strongyloides can infect horses. And strongyloides is the one that sometimes passed from mare to foal in the milk. But I don't believe it's as serious a problem as Strongyloid used to be. And despite the similarity of the names, they're not that closely related. Strongyloid used to infect 90 to 100% of horses in the US. The life cycle is very similar to human hookworm. Eggs pass in the feces. Larvae will then burrow into the horse's skin if the horse lies down. And the larvae will travel through the circulatory system. And Strongyloid vulgaris was notorious for causing inflammation of the mesenteric arteries, the arteries that feed the mesentery, the web-like tissue that holds the guts in place. It could cause arteritis, inflammation of those arteries, and sometimes clots. That can lead to the death of parts of the intestine, which will probably lead to a dead horse if you don't treat it surgically. Fortunately, this has become much less of a problem ever since the introduction of drugs called ivermectins. The gent who discovered ivermectins actually got the Nobel Prize for Medicine and Health a few years back. Ivermectin is actually produced by a soil-dwelling bacterium, believe genus Streptomyces, and it has been very effective at controlling parasite infections. I think you can actually buy it down at the co-op in Conway and inject it into your own cows and horses. Nick, I'm sure you've heard of this. Is our other vet tech person here? Abby, was that you?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I don't mean to be directing my vet questions all to Nick. I know you're working as a vet tech as well. I assume you've heard of ivermectin?
I'm not. I'm just shadowing.
Oh, okay. All right. For some reason, I had it in my head that you were uh, that you were a technician. But regardless, you've heard of ivermectin?
No.
Okay. I believe it can be used in humans as well. But anyway, I know I've seen it on the shelves of the local co-ops. So Strongyloid is much less of a problem, and its relative Cyathostomum, which is more resistant but has a similar life cycle, is a larger problem now, or so I am told. I'm not a horse owner. I can't speak to personal experience with this. Ding. Right. That's the stomach lining. I forget what animal that's from, but I think this one can infect multiple species. That's the stomach lining, and you can see these little things that look like lighter bubbles. There's a bunch of them in the top center. That's Ostratagia, the so-called brown stomach worm. And these guys embed themselves in the stomach lining and form these nodules. So you can see those right there. Ding. This is one I actually remember seeing as an undergrad, Nippostrongylus brasilensis. We did an undergrad lab that I can't really do for you guys because it required the services of some animal care specialists and a lot of hoops to jump through. But this is commonly used as a laboratory model for parasitic nematodes because it parasitizes rats. And it will latch on to a villus or a fold of the rat intestine. And as it grows, it takes on this spiral shape. You can see it here in this picture. So if you open the intestine of a worm-infected rat, it actually looks like it's got, maybe dozens of tiny little pink telephone cords sprouting off the inside. And we did a lab that shows that the more crowded the rat was, the more eggs the rat had been fed, the smaller the individual worms got. Many parasites will adjust their size to adapt to more or less crowded conditions inside the host. And we were able to see this for ourselves. Unfortunately, at UCA, we don't really have the support personnel that you need to do something like this. But if you get to a university, a vet school with a better program, you might end up encountering Nippostrongylus again. It's, you see it once, you'll never forget it. These little pink coils inside a dissected rat. Ding. And then species in genus Dictyocolus are affectionately known as lungworms because instead of being gut parasites, they are lung parasites. The common name for parasitic bronchitis is husk. Common symptom is a type of coughing. Dictyocolus viviparus causes it in cattle. Dictyocolus arnfelti can cause it in horses and donkeys. I forget if it's the same species or a different one, but I know that sheep can be infected. I believe goats also can. So this is the kind of thing you might encounter in, larger livestock. Lungworm. Ding. There's lungworms in a different family that can infect rodents and carnivores. Vet people in small animal practice might see dogs can get this, cats can get this. Again, I suspect it's not that common. Metastrongylis can infect pigs. I think that's a pig's lung you're looking at with pig lungworm. Unlike hookworm, these usually have intermediate hosts. So metastrongylis, for example, develops in earthworms and then is passed to pigs if they eat earthworms. Pigs, wild pigs will root up a lot and just eat whatever they can root up out of the soil. So apparently wild pigs eat earthworms a lot. Yeah, so Arkansas Razorbacks are potentially at risk. Be nice if we could use this as an excuse for last season, I suppose. Sorry, Coach, we couldn't win any games. The Razorbacks had lungworms. Ding. The last one I'll mention is the rat lungworm, Angiostrongylus. As the name suggests, the usual host is the rat, but it is endemic in places like the South Pacific, and there have been some outbreaks of it in places like Louisiana. Of course, there was a big outbreak of it in Hawaii, although maybe not big, but 9 people infected with this parasite was fairly a big deal. They can be spread to humans by eating undercooked intermediate hosts, eating undercooked freshwater shrimp, undercooked frog's legs, raw or undercooked snails and slugs, things like that. And you really don't want to get this because what it causes in humans is known as eosinophilic meningitis. Meningitis, I assume you know, eosinophils are one type of white blood cell. And these worms, when they, since they travel through blood vessels, they can irritate the meningeal blood vessels, and they've been known to leave those and burrow into the brain or the spinal cord. So this is another one of those things that you really don't want to get. Not too much of an everyday problem for most of us, but again, you can get it by eating contaminated produce or eating undercooked intermediate hosts like shrimp, frogs, snails, things like that. So this was actually fairly well studied in the rat before instances of human infection were ever reported, showing that sometimes very basic research can pay off if something suddenly becomes a clinical problem. And ding. Right. Any questions I can answer quickly?
Not for me.
Okay. Any more problems with that lag? Are my time delays enough to give you guys good transitions?
It's better. I don't know what causes it. It's like every few slides, it'll just take its sweet time.
Okay.
My
All
main screen is really frozen, and then the side screen you're fine. So
Okay, so you can see me, but not the slides?
correct.
Okay. Sorry you're stuck with that. The slides are generally a lot better looking. But
I have a question.
yes.
For tomorrow, you said the lab starts at 2, or does it start at 2:40? Our normal
Right.
time?
Thanks for the correction. We'll start at 2:40.
Okay.
All right. We'll start it at 2:40. It won't last the full 3 hours. But I do at least want to talk you through a few slides and then show you these adorable little tapeworm larvae. The experiment is going to involve watching for hatching time, seeing how long it takes for eggs to hatch under different concentrations. And I might end up just recording that and uploading the video directly and not making it a part of a hangout. But I do at least want to give you a little bit of personal time and show you at least a few slides.
Okie dokie.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now. And boom.